Hi, everybody. My name is Evan Radisik. I am the Managing Director of the Cloud Software Association. Thanks very much for joining me today for another masterclass. Today, I have Jake Jorgovan from ContentAllies talking about how to position your content for partner recruitment. It's a big theme. We're going to talk about a few different aspects. I don't want to get too deep into it. We want to leave some time for questions as well and discussion. But I'm going to hand it off to Jake. He's going to go through a few slides, and then we'll kind of break and ask questions. So think about kind of some of the items you want to go over. It can be a little bit awkward with Zoom to jump in there if you do have questions, but just awkwardly get in there and ask away, and we'll try to address as much as we can in an hour, and then afterwards we can continue discussion in Slack. So, okay, Jake, take it away.
Thanks for having me on here, Evan, and hey, everybody. So yeah, I got a presentation I'll walk through today just around positioning content. And at the end, if any of you guys want to kind of volunteer, I'm happy to kind of brainstorm just some approaches for you guys as well. So I'll dive through the presentation and stuff today, but just if any of you guys want to volunteer at the end, feel free to raise your hand, and happy to do some live brainstorming on how these strategies and approaches I'm mentioning could work for your guys' specific situation. So I'll share my screen here. And can you see on your side, Evan, and everything? You good?
Yep, everything's good.
Cool. All right, so we'll be diving into just again how to position your content for partner recruitment. And today what we'll be talking about is really, first of all, how to reframe content for partner managers and how to just think about it in a different way and kind of the way a lot of people think about it in a new approach. We'll share kind of that new approach to content and dive into a lot of that. I'm going to give quite a few examples today of exactly kind of like these strategies and approach to content that I'm talking about. And then I'll also dive into kind of specific action steps on how to actually go about launching this content partnership initiative and everything that I'm talking about here. So to start off, the problem that I want to hit on is, you want to build partner relationships with ideally bigger and better partners. Like that's kind of what you're trying to get to, but a lot of times maybe you struggle to get their attention, struggle to open the door, get them to take you seriously. Maybe they're a bigger person than you, they don't have the time. You're trying to just, build those relationships with them. But it's really kind of hard to get their attention. And so the question is, like, what can you do if you're coming from, say, like a smaller company and you're trying to get someone's attention, or you want to build relationships with more people that can be ideal partners, but maybe cold email isn't working. Maybe just reaching out directly is just not quite getting you where you want to go. Like, what's another route or approach you can take there? And so one of the things that I really believe is that building a content platform is an amazing solution to this. And that might sound odd at first as I dive into this, because a lot of people think, content, isn't that like a marketing thing? Like, how is that going to help me build partnerships? And that's really want to kind of get into this idea of reframing kind of what content is. And so as we go into this, we're really going to rethink content and what it means, especially in terms of building partnerships. And so when most people think of content marketing, or they think of content for a company, they often think, hey, it's this marketing thing. And they think, okay, I'm going to go create content that's going to rank on Google and drive inbound leads. And that's what content marketing is. And that's kind of where a lot of people get this in their mind and where it is. But what I want to really share is that the approach and the way and the strategies that I'm going to be talking about today with content are different. And really what I want to hammer home is this idea that content equals networking. And if you're utilizing the strategies here that you can create great content, maybe it'll rank, but really the core of, building a content platform is it's going to enable you to network with people that you otherwise didn't have the ability to network to. You had nothing of value to give them maybe out of the gate, or it was hard to open up with value. And it's going to just enable you to really grow your network in a value first driven way. And so I'll share just kind of the high level approach and the strategy that I'm talking about, and just this slide here, and then I'm going to dive into the details of it. But this new approach to content that I'm sharing is really, you start off by creating ideally a podcast or a webinar series that features your ideal customers, strategic partners, or influencers. And I've seen some people do this in blog format, but I think ideally like webinars or podcasts are better formats because you actually talk with the people live. But it's, similar to what, SaaS Connect is doing now, where they are doing these interviews and they're featuring people. It's, an amazing kind of networking tool, and it creates content at the same time. And so you can do this for your organization by creating a podcast or a webinar series that's really going to focus on who your ideal customers are, interviewing them, pulling out their expertise. And really, like you build this kind of idea, you build this theme, you schedule consistent interviews with your target partners. And then it's really just about building relationships. And what this becomes is like a very value first door opener to building relationships with new potential partners. And, you build those relationships and then you can really nurture those into partnerships and revenue. And so this is kind of the overarching idea I want to like hit on today. And I'm going to dive into a lot more detail of this, but this kind of concept that you're going to create essentially your own media property and use that as a tool to open doors is kind of the key that I want to drive home. And so I'll share an example of this one. This is actually a SaaS company that was good friends with the guy that ran this podcast for quite a few years. And this company called Hubstaff, and they do time tracking tool for agencies. And what they launched was this podcast called the Agency Advantage Podcast. And they created this and they used it to interview basically all of the top agency influencers. They just went through and interviewed everyone out there who had an audience of agency owners, other SaaS products that were selling to agency owners that were complementary. And they just went through, and anybody that could be a strategic partner, they were interviewing them on their podcast. And then they leveraged those relationships to do either co-marketing, to do promotion, and really just kind of become like with a lot of these top industry influencers. And so again, the guy that took on this role, I knew him. His name was Andy Baldassi, and he had no expertise in agencies. He was not a thought leader or anything like this. He was just a guy that got hired into this role and said, "Hey, I think podcasting is going to be an awesome way to do this." And he starts up this podcast and just starts going out, and he just takes that perspective of the kind of the new guy to the field who wants to learn from all of the experts. And he just starts going through, starts interviewing all the influencers, and then just using those to build relationships. And it just led to, again, a really great growth for them and a bunch of awesome opportunities. And so that is just, again, I think a great example of this, where even if you're not an expertise in the space, you can be the one that interviews the experts, helps you kind of build those relationships with them. And so again, as we're looking at this, the way we like to think about this is it's like this mixture of account-based marketing mixed with partnerships, mixed with content marketing, because you're building all of these relationships when you're doing these interviews, but you're also going to make a ton of content on the back end of it as well. So your marketing team will love you and sales team will love you as well. And so we kind of say that these are, you're building these conversations, you're having these authentic personal conversations that turn into relationships that can ultimately lead to revenue and partnerships, but they're also going to really help you drive on those content marketing goals as well. And so it's an interesting thing where the podcast, the relationship, that's like the first piece of value. But on the back end of that, you're going to get all of this content, all of these things that you can create off of that, which is going to help you attract more of those ideal partners or ideal customers and everything toward your guys' business as well. So again, some of the other psychological ways that this works really well is the reason that this works is whenever you do these kind of shows, you're really going to make your target partner, the person you're reaching out to, look like a star. You're offering to interview them on your platform and distribute that to your audience. So you're featuring them. And so a lot of questions a lot of people have is like, oh, if I start this, is anyone going to say yes if I reach out to interview them? And in reality is like almost everyone is going to say yes, especially if you even have any sort of basic kind of company email list or customer base that you can kind of begin to promote the show to. That becomes just a phenomenal thing where people are going to say, hey, this is like free PR. I want to be interviewed here. And so you're really delivering value first. And that's the really cool part about this, where if you were just trying to cold outreach to new partners, try to structure relationships, get conversations going, Might be difficult, but if you're reaching out and you're interviewing them, you're building a relationship, you're giving them value, you're giving them exposure before you ever ask them to consider your partner program or ask them to try to do any sort of engagement or anything there. So it's really a value focused kind of first approach when you're doing these types of interviews. The other thing that's going to help is this is going to also just establish you as an industry authority. And so as, a podcast host, webinar host, you're going to start to gain credibility and everything. And you're not really selling, you're just adding value to your guests and your listeners and everything like this. And even if the listener base is really small, like that's okay, because you're still putting this out there, you're putting yourself next to people and you're starting to attract that. It's an interesting thing, but once you get a podcast past, 20 episodes or so, people start reaching out to you. And it becomes this really interesting thing where like my inbox is literally overwhelmed with people pitching me, trying to consistently be on my podcasts. And it's because once you reach a certain level and you do enough of these, you have an authority and that people want to be interviewed on your show or on your series or anything like this. And so it actually starts to attract the right kind of people toward you as well. Again, this is also just going to be really helpful. Your marketing team is going to love this for content. You can repurpose these as videos, as quote blocks, as just articles. You can take from a single one of those interviews, you can create tons of stuff, just like CSA does with all of these. They take these, they turn them into YouTube videos, and then they put articles on the side, and then they put videos or stuff on social. You're able to kind of do all of that as well, where any single one of these can become something that your marketing team can do a ton with to repurpose. And then also, again, just the brand building and the audience side of things. Like I mentioned, over time, like podcasts are really growing as a field. The webinars are really growing. And it's something where this is, I always say, like the third, fourth, fifth benefit of taking this approach. It's like the relationship is first, the content is second. And if you get an audience that actually starts to bring inbound leads, like that's awesome. And, bring inbound partners, that's great, but it's really something that is slower to kind of build. And those other values, the relationships, the authority that you build, tends to be even more powerful kind of approach there. And then the last thing I say is that like your media property becomes an asset. And so if you think about this, if at the beginning of the day, you're trying to get a partner's attention and you're trying to, but you're too small at this. As you grow, like as I mentioned, like you get past 20 episodes on a podcast, suddenly people are starting to reach out to you. They want to be featured in front of you. And it's really incredible that I've got the opportunity to interview just, some, New York Times bestselling authors and really high influencers and everything, and build relationships there because I have a media property now where people want to be exposed there. So beyond just your product, that the partnerships that you can build, your kind of media and your content becomes this other leveraging chip in kind of your partner engagements, where you could say, hey, we'll feature you in a piece of content, or we'll interview you on our platform. And that becomes this kind of additional, almost like bargaining chip that you have whenever you're putting together new partner relationships. So another example of this I want to share, this is actually one of my podcasts as well. It's called Leaders of B2B. And so my company is ContentAllies, and we are a B2B podcasting agency. And so another example of how we do this is we basically created Leaders of B2B, which focuses on interviews with tech CEOs and then influencers and partners that would be a good fit. And just to even demonstrate this, the whole partnership, we are the official podcast sponsor here of CSA and SaaS Connect now. And this entire thing started because I reached out and interviewed Sunir. At some point I was like, okay, I want to get involved with more tech associations. And so let me go interview and try to connect with people and see who I can actually structure a partnership with. And so the entire engagement, the entire relationship here all started from first interviewing Sunir and then having conversations back and forth and building upon that relationship. But instead of just kind of cold emailing people out of the blue, started with an interview, gave him exposure to our entire audience of tech entrepreneurs and everything, and then kind of built on that as well. And then similar things, like I'm actually doing that with some other conferences. We're in works with Traction Conference right now and Dublin Tech Summit. And also I'm even working on like a partnership type of thing with TechCrunch, where I'm looking at, okay, these are the influencers. These are people who have large audiences of the people that I want to be working with. And so I'm reaching out to interview them and setting up relationships there. I'm exposing them to my existing audience and everything there, and just building this up. And so that's, again, another example of a way that we use this strategy and how we're actually using this in our own business. But again, the other cool thing I want to share is just, again, this is, we repurpose that as well. So your marketing on the backside of this, if you do these, you can keep it really basic. You can do a webinar, you can do a Zoom recording and put it up on YouTube. But if you give this to your marketing team, we also turn these into articles. We turn these into these social media videos and posts and everything like this, and podcasts. So that way you can kind of really create a lot of different types of content with it. And so that's the other really kind of cool piece of this, where it's going to engage your LinkedIn, attract more people to you as well. And so as we dive into this, and I'm sharing this, there's a few common mistakes that I see people make when they do try to go down this strategy. And so I'll share this kind of like the biggest strategic mistake you can make when kind of setting one of these up. And so the biggest thing is you don't want to create a content series focused around yourself. And I'll give some kind of examples of that. But for example, we do podcasting for B2B tech companies. If we started a podcast about podcasting, that would be a fail. Like that would be not good, because our ideal customers, our ideal partners, our ideal audience is not going to want to be on that type of podcast. Instead, we created a show that features and boosts our target customers and partners. That's the approach you want to take. Another example is we've got a client they have a platform for contextual advertising. And they initially came and they're like, we want to do the contextual advertising podcast. And I was like, well, that's cool. And you can do that if you want to just be kind of a marketing, pushing your ideas out there. But none of your clients are going to think they're an expert in contextual advertising. None of your ideal partners are experts in contextual advertising. And so you want to go up a level, and we're now doing something around like kind of ad tech executives is kind of the theme of their podcast. We're still landing on a name, but instead of doing something around their little niche of contextual advertising, you go up a level and you say, okay, we want to create a show that features advertising technology executives. Like that is the show and the concept, because then we create that platform, and now we can reach out, we can interview those kind of people, we can feature them, and our ideal kind of clients, they're going to be interested in that type of content to learn from their peers. So the biggest mistake, again, is don't create a content series focused around yourself, but instead create it around your target partners, your target customers, everything like that. Another great example, this is someone who did a phenomenal job with this as well. I've got a friend who runs a podcast called the Grow Your Shopify Store. And these guys are email marketing firm for e-commerce. So they work with really large consumer-focused brands. And so what they did is they featured interviews with Shopify store owners and then a lot of partners, SaaS companies, other vendors in the Shopify ecosystem. And what they ended up doing is they would interview a potential partner company on their podcast, use that as a way to build the relationship. After that, they would basically pitch them on doing a joint webinar to that partner company's audience. And they would come up with an idea, say, hey, we'd love to do your webinar to your audience. This was awesome. And really enjoyed having you on the show. I think we could teach some things to your audience as well. And then they would basically do the webinar, have that initial engagement, and then they would look for additional partnerships and collaborations. And they've done through this, they basically built relationships with some of the best kind of like partners in the ecosystem around there that had collaborative kind of tools and products and services in the Shopify ecosystem. And so that a simple thing where it's really low friction, you can do this joint webinar thing. You don't need to worry about tech integrations or anything like this, but this kind of content collaborations can just be a really low friction, easy kind of way to start to build those relationships. So that's, again, another, I think, just really solid example of someone who's done this approach really well. So now we'll kind of come back around to how we do this, how you actually kind of launch this forward. And I'll share just some kind of tips here, and then we'll dive into maybe some examples and brainstorming here. But in terms of how you do it, what I will say is that if you can try to do this all on your own, it is challenging, but you will need either a production partner or probably a team member to help you manage this. If you keep it to simple Zoom and YouTube, you can probably do a lot of this on your own. I've got a link to an article here, which I can drop in the chat afterward on how to start a podcast. And I also have a list of kind of top podcast companies. Obviously, we're the official sponsor of CSA and everything as well. But I'll say that, if you do the webinar series, it's probably the easiest, and just take a webinar and then upload on YouTube. I know CSA, even prior to us working with them, you guys were kind of editing this in iMovie and doing some basics there. So you can definitely kind of do something there on your own. And so following this article will kind of give you some tips there on how to do that with your own podcasting. But if you can pull in a production partner, that'll help you kind of do all the repurposing and the other pieces there. So you can either take it yourself, or the production side, how you handle that. There's a lot of ways to approach it. Happy to answer questions there. But really, once you figure out how you're going to handle the production side of it, it's really simple, of just building a list of your potential partners and beginning to reach out. And one of the things I say with these media properties is it's really easy starting points. If you start off interviewing other podcasters, speakers at industry conferences, leaders involved in other conferences, or authors in your space, eventually maybe you can start going to the SaaS companies and stuff like this. But this kind of bucket right here, these are people who will almost always say yes to another podcast experience or more exposure, because they're very used to speaking. They're very used to doing podcast appearances, and people that are speaking at other events, they're almost always the ones that are going to likely say yes as well. So those are easy starting points. And then you can also look at, again, associations are another place to look. And then from there, start to build out kind of that standard strategic partner strategy, all the ways. I know Sunir's done recent presentation on mapping partners as well. So it's a similar thing where you can kind of take those approaches and start to use this, but this becomes another door opener as well. And then, when you reach out, this is just kind of a standard framework that I use whenever I reach out to invite someone onto one of these. I'll open up, try to personalize the first sentence, and I'll say, your name came up while searching potential guests for leaders of B2B podcast. The show features, we'll talk to people similarly to you, and we'll be shared out with our company email list of so many people. Would you be interested in being a guest on the show? And so really, by just having a show that's themed, something that's themed that focuses on your podcast, and then making sure that you have social proof in there, that you're either saying, hey, we're going to share this with our email list of our company, or we've had other credible guests like this. Even if you don't have an email list, the other big thing that we'll often do is try to get a few credible names from your existing network. We have a client, for example, who just doesn't have an email list at all, but he was able to pull on guests from, Comcast and Whirlpool and 3M onto his initial episodes from people in his network. And that creates credibility. And so the biggest thing you want to do, especially in the early stages, is just make sure that your emails have that social proof and credibility when you reach out. And that's going to help engage further just increase the conversion of people saying yes to being a part of this platform. And so really from there, once you're reaching out, it just comes down to nurturing these relationships. You start with the interview, you really just focus on doing a great job on the interview, but then after that call, you can start the conversation about areas for collaboration. I remember I interviewed Sunir, and we just chatted with him and was like, hey, really like what you guys are doing. If there's any way that we can get involved, would love to just, figure out how we can support or get involved. And we just started chatting, and there wasn't anything right there, but it was probably 4 to 5 months later when he was just saying, hey, we're swamped with trying to manage our YouTube videos and just all the production and everything after all these calls. We need help with this. Like, can you guys help? And that was, so it took months for that to kind of develop, but then it turned into this phenomenal partnership after that. And so again, it's just something that you start the conversation, but then it's just really about building value, building relationships, and ultimately building partnerships. Like over that time, I ended up becoming a customer of AppBind because Sunir got me on that, and I love his tool, and so it's just really about kind of building those relationships and then letting that evolve into kind of partnerships over time. But I think what I'm trying to hit at is it can become a systematic thing where you're consistently every week interviewing someone, featuring someone new, starting a relationship, and then you kind of just really build and see which ones of those kind of flourish over time.
Hey, Jake, I got a question for you. I think this is really interesting because it's really easy to kind of think through how you could use this to recruit, especially some of those like more anchor partners, reaching out to say, hey, let's talk about a partnership or a distribution deal or whatever the case is, or just having a conversation. It gives you a really compelling reason to reach out, right? Like, and I've done this in a few companies that I work with is, if you can reach out and say, look, I genuinely want to hear your story. I want to hear what you have to say. Maybe point out, hey, I noticed you guys really transformed this project or this thing. Do you want to be on my podcast or a friend's podcast or whatever the case is? Come talk to us. We want to interview you. Generally, you're right. Like, people love talking about themselves, and especially if you can kind of bring it back to like, hey, this is a huge audience, a bigger audience. Here are some flashy names that have been part of it. They're gonna want in. And as soon as that transition of like, yep, I'm in, let's talk. As soon as that happens, you almost go into a different category, and that conversation becomes so much easier because now that's like, oh, like we're in the friend circle. Like, let's, we're talking and discussing and da da da. And then that's when you kind of position yourself, okay, well, we also have a partner program, some of the other things that eventually go there. It's more organic and there's already a relationship there. And I think a lot of people don't look at it that way. It's very much a tactic to get, obviously you're not going to do it with every single like small partner, but those bigger ones that this is worth the time, it's absolutely a very, very effective strategy.
Yeah. And it's like you said, whenever you interview someone too, you just learn a ton from them. And that's what's really amazing from it too, where often by the end of those interviews, you may say, okay, this person could be a great partner or this person wouldn't be, or something like that. But you're getting to just have, an hour-long conversation with them, getting to interview them, pick their brain, hear their story and learn from them. And that gives you just a ton of information. It helps you kind of probably approach them in a much more informed way if you do have an idea. A lot of times, after an interview, we might approach someone with an idea for a collaboration, but now like we have all this information we didn't have before because we interviewed them and we can figure out a better way to collaborate there. But yeah, I think a lot of people, they just think, okay, start a podcast to build an audience or start a webinar series to try to just get people to come in and, viewers and leads to come there, but I don't think they realize the actual value of the networking from each one of those interviews.
Yeah. And it's also like, I mean, if you're a product that, that focuses on servicing agencies or whatever that vertical industry is, bringing in subject matter experts that add value to what they're doing, not value to what your product is, but value to what your customer and your audience is. So it's like, hey, we have a tool that helps agencies design, prototypes. Great. Let's bring in other agency and other brands that we know have value add to that process, right? So whether it's current or past, ideally it's something current, something new. So now you're bringing in somebody that adds value to that equation, but also somebody probably is either an integration partner or it could be a reseller, somebody that has clearly shared customers because you both add value to the same equation. So now you're hitting like three birds with one stone, right? Like you're accessing a potential partner or reseller, you're adding value to your existing customer base by providing, subject matter expertise that maybe they didn't hear about before. And everybody's kind of learning and discovering the same process. And obviously there's a whole bunch of marketing and brand awareness stuff that happens by, obviously marketing that episode or whatever that content is across channel. So you're kind of like, you're hitting so many different buckets, but you're only doing it just by having a genuine conversation with somebody. All right. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible. It's hard to like, really kind of sit down and think through all the different layers, but I just think it's such an effective tool to like reach your potential partner, but also like engage with existing customers. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the relationships and then like the thought leadership that comes from it, the content repurposing, and then just like it's valuable to your customers. There's so many different layers to what makes it work well. So yeah, definitely agree there. Awesome.
Anyway.
So I was hitting about the summary slide of mine. We're just kind of wrapping
Sorry,
up
I
on
totally
that as
took
well.
you off tangent.
I know, no, it's good.
I really kind of wanted to circle it back to like, this is, you really need to look at it from that angle. And once you kind of look at it from that angle, everything becomes clear why you're doing it, right? Because you're like, okay, I know the goal and the objective I'm trying to reach through this. I just have a bunch of stuff to do in between, right? And I think this is where this is kind of useful. Is like, here's how to actually tactically do this, right?
Yeah, I love it. For anyone here on the call, does anyone want to kind of maybe share your particular business or situation that you're in, and kind of can talk or brainstorm on how this could maybe be effective or work for you?
Jake, I have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
Brad here. I'm with a small business insurance platform called Berksy. So we sell insurance. It's not something that people know a lot about. So there's always the dynamic that we're considering is content. I guess moral stories. Content's important to us, particularly to our customers, to be differentiated in the space, right? Because insurance is confusing. People don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about it, but they do have some anxiety or agita around whether they have the right coverage in place or they need, what coverage they need and things of that sort. And it can be speaking French, sometimes to them. And so we think a lot about content. But I guess question that I have that kind of comes up is, just like any team at lots of emerging businesses, everyone's busy, the roadmap's quite full, right? And we're thinking about how to prioritize efforts, right? So we're fortunate that we have dedicated resources to content marketing. But where and how to allocate their time is always a challenge as well. So, and often, marketing being we're primarily a direct to customer, direct to consumer business, trying to disrupt, the traditional insurance model, which is distributing through brokers and agents. We don't have to go down that tangent, but we're typically going direct to customer, but through partnerships. That's what my focus is. And so I guess I'm curious, have you had success? Like a lot of my business cases internally need to be driven by data, right? To some extent, like I can make the point around, hey, it's going to increase my networking abilities. It's going to increase my ability to have thoughtful conversations with partners. But the question is kind of like, sounds great, Brad, but like, what is it like tangibly, what does that mean to the business? And I recognize and I appreciate, obviously there's a middle ground there that has to be struck, but I just am curious if you've had success trying to, I guess, guesstimate or put together metrics that could potentially justify the investment, right? Because this is not an insignificant time commitment, right? Or bandwidth consideration if you want to do it right, from what I can tell. So just trying to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that typical inbound marketing that you discussed earlier in the presentation, Jake. Like there's such a quantifiable thing to that, right? It's we create an ad, we know who's clicking, who's viewing. There's a lot of statistical analysis around is that performing well and which market and how. How does that relate to like let's say podcasting? Like, is there similar type of metrics, and how can you track that? Like, can you track that ROI? I actually have no idea.
Yeah, it's so I'll share just kind of some of the metrics, and I'm curious also maybe to like understand or dive in a bit more. I'll answer the question, then I want to dive into more some kind of follow-up questions on that. But so I'd say from what we've seen for most of our customers that are running this is that will convert probably around somewhere maybe 5 and like a good range of like 10% of interviews into some level of actual like revenue producing relationship. And if you think about it, if you do 50 of these interviews in a year, and if you have 50 of these conversations with your ideal partners, people that you want to do relationships with, like how many of those will actually convert? Some of them maybe won't have a need, it won't be a right fit, you guys can't really find something to work. But if you get 1 out of every 10 of those, or even 1 out of every 20 of those, and if you're really kind of like aiming high with this and they can become big partnerships, then that is kind of where the ROI kind of tends to drive from it. And that's at least, I guess, the numbers we're seeing with our own podcast, and what we have a few other clients doing. But I'm curious, what, like for you with like the insurance platform, who are your ideal partners, or what does that look like? Or who are the people that you're engaging with there?
Fair question. And without getting too far into the weeds, so we provide typically like medical malpractice insurance. So allied health professionals are a big segment. So like nurses, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, physical therapists, et cetera. And then we also, medical malpractice is a form of professional liability insurance, if you will. We also provide professional liability, which for some other audiences gets called errors and omissions because it's not bodily injury related. So it's so we sell that errors and omissions insurance to real estate brokerages, so like your Caldwell Banker, your Century 21, local small business, and also to independent tech professionals who are independent but manifest as small businesses. So we're pretty specific actually about our customer segments rather than kind of creating like more of a one size fits all for small businesses, if you will, because we just think that allows us to build a product that's more tailored to what they need and how that looks. But it cuts both ways, right? So like a lot of our partner, I find that it actually helps give us a little bit more focus. If you try to boil the whole small business ocean, there's a lot of products and services and partners to consider. With those customer segments that are very specific, it does allow us to be a bit more targeted around who we're going after. So maybe we'll stick with the allied health professionals segment for a second. That can run the gamut. It could be like the Americans. I'm making some of these up, but they may actually exist. The American Association of Nurses, right? As a more traditional partner, could be maybe a practice management software that a nurse practitioner uses to manage their schedule, right? Or maybe it's even the scrub. Maybe they wear scrubs, and we want to partner with the scrub, company to give them discounts on their scrubs, right? Like what they wear to work every day. So it kind of runs the gamut, but ultimately it's trying to access the customers at the time that they're considering or thinking about insurance, or so that you're top of mind when they think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I like that. I think, as I look through this, and it's always interesting companies when you have like a bunch of different niches and stuff like this, but it could be like, for like your platform could be something around like, the business of nursing or something along those lines. And because what you don't want is something that's focused around the nurses individually, because you guys, if I understand correctly, you're not trying to sell directly to nurses. You're trying to build partnerships with companies that have those relationships directly with nurses. Is that right?
Well, this is where again, I'm trying to distill some of the takeaways. It cuts both ways, right? So we definitely want to serve our end customer, who might be an individual nurse that manifests as a small business, right? Because they're an independent contractor of some variety or something to that effect. But we also want to drive partnership opportunities, right? And so our content, generally speaking, is built around the theme of protect and grow. So like protect your career, and by protecting it, you allow your career to grow, right? Because the risk is something goes wrong, or you get accused of something go wrong, you're in a lawsuit, and therefore you're shot, right? Like your business is shot because you're paying out tons of money to defend yourself, whether rightly or wrongly, and it's the end game, right? So it's like protect your business so you can grow your career kind of over time. So that's kind of the theme, and I'm kind of constantly trying to figure out how to weave that theme into both partner recruitment, but also partner content. Right? Because like a partner who serves the same audience might want to collaborate, co-market, do whatever we can do to kind of add value to their customers that way. We're also trying to but I'm trying to think about like, okay, well, how does it, as the point you've alluded to, how does it open doors at the partnership level? So let's say that association might reach out to us, say, you've put some great content together for nurses, and like we help serve them too. So, we want to work. Yeah, that's the type of stuff I'm trying to think about.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think the exact positioning on the show, whether you go kind of business of nursing level or whether it's focusing around the nurses, I think you can, or maybe you kind of find a way to straddle the middle. But I think if you build that, and I think if you just focus on like that, an individual, maybe vertical at a time, because it's actually not very hard to spin up multiple of these kind of brands. You probably do one after the other. But again, if you do that and then you start reaching out to that association and you interview someone there, and you interview someone at practice management software companies and scrubs companies, and you say, hey, we're putting this together. We're trying to, do this educational resource for nurses, and, I guess nurse practitioner businesses and everything. And you kind of just build that list and start just building that content engine. And what's really cool is each one of these, you can then say, hey, like I said, what the guys at Wavebreak did is, you interview someone and they say, hey, like, would you be interested? We'd be happy to kind of do some education to your audience as well. And just from there, can easily start to kind of begin some co-marketing and then see if there's other ways to, have discounts or other partnerships where that can take that even further.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you an opportunity to kind of reach out to, like, if it is an association, if there is an association of nurses or whatever small business, even if it's like a shopping mall with 300 store, whatever the case is, it gives you an opportunity to kind of reach out to those guys and say, look, we do have a show, we want to feature somebody with an interesting story. It gives you an opportunity to kind of reach out to them and dig through who's in their network to go for an interview, and that interview becomes a content, but it really gives you that really compelling reason to start getting in there, asking questions, networking within what that company is. And then you kind of uncover things. I find is like, you approach them with one thing, whether it's association, they'll say, oh yeah, there's also this association or this organization you should talk to, and then it keeps kind of skyrocketing from there. But you're kind of positioning it as like, we're looking to talk about the issues and challenges that industry faces, right? It's not like we're selling insurance. It's like, no, we value the industry and we want to talk about what's going on in the industry, but it's sponsored by you guys, right? So like, there's no illusion of what you're trying to do, but it's a fair trade-off, right? You're providing value-added content that's genuinely interesting to them in return for brand recognition. Everybody's okay with that as long as there's a value exchange. But the key is to kind of, I guess, figure out where's the gap. Like, I mean, I don't know. Is there a podcast or some sort of series that talks to nurses? I mean, I would imagine there is by now, but if there isn't, that's a hell of an opportunity because there's a lot of nurses. And if they can listen to a show, especially if there's some entertainment factor to it that talks about their daily life and what they're doing, that's a huge opportunity. If there isn't one, I don't know. Like, Jake, have you seen a podcast about nurses?
There are some out there for nurses. We actually have one.
Okay.
We run a podcast called LTC Heroes, which is literally for long-term care facilities. And it's literally, they're actually like a software for long-term care facilities, and actually kind of probably actually an ideal partner for what you're talking about, Brad. And for them, again, we built the show as a way for them to kind of network and learn and grow. But I think the other point I'll hit on that you were saying, Evan, is that like, especially for like someone like yourself, Brad, where you have a bunch of these different verticals, like this is also going to you're going to learn a ton about each vertical every time you do these interviews, and you'll like get exposed and like to just probably like lists of new partner ideas and stuff as you get deeper into those and you understand and you start to go in those deeper. The guy at the hosting the LTC Heroes podcast was not from the long-term care industry. Like, it doesn't have a background in it, fresh, brand new to it. So he's just going in it as he's like, I'm just embracing the fact that I'm an idiot trying to learn and like understand, pull insights out of these people, but he's learning tons of stuff, seeing how all the vendors work, seeing how all of these things work together, because they're an actual EHR platform for long-term care facilities. And so he's using that to understand, see the ecosystem, see how all these vendors and these healthcare, everything's connected and whatnot, and how all that plays together. And so it just becomes a way for him to learn the industry and build a ton of those relationships at the same time. Yeah.
Nice, guys.
Awesome. Any other thoughts, or any of you other guys want to maybe kind of jam or chat on any of this as well?
I have a key question that I've been dying to ask you for ages. So there's a lot of podcasts right now, and people are getting a little bit contented out, but there are definitely better structures for organizing it so it's interesting. I've been trying to give advice to some other people who are doing podcasts who are wondering, if they're boring or not. I don't even know if ours are boring. The one I do are boring. I have no idea.
Yeah.
How would you advise to someone to make a podcast interesting? I like Noah Kagan's podcast. He's always interesting. I feel, I could be more interesting. So,
yeah, some of the things that I always like try to say, and I think interviewing is a skill that is very much can be learned and improved on over time, just like anything else. But the biggest things that I always look at when I'm doing interviewing is I try to look at the person that I'm interviewing and I try to brainstorm all of the things that I want to learn from them. And that is one. So I'll start off and just like, what am I curious about? What does this person know that I don't know? And so, because if I come out of the interview feeling smarter and like I learned stuff and that I got expertise out of this, then that's going to mean that the audience will as well. So that's one very big thing is just, go where your curiosity takes you. Don't script questions. Don't try to be too structured with it, but go where your curiosity genuinely takes you and what you want to learn from the person. Because if you're learning, your audience will. That's one kind of high level advice. And the other one I think that really is extremely helpful to do better interviews is there's a tool called active listening. And if you've never studied this, it basically what it is, if someone's talking to you, the problem is that many of us, whenever someone's talking to us, we're not actually listening. We're just thinking about what the other person, what we want to say in response. And so you're kind of like, they say something and then your just mind's going off on what you're going to say next, and you don't even listen to half of what they say. And so one of the things when you're interviewing someone is to kind of just node key points and try to just very focus and be like aware and listen to what they're saying. And you might say something like, okay, hit a point on active listening. Okay, I got that. Okay, 1. And like, I'm like, what I'll do is I'll literally like off camera, I'll just like put 1 up and like off, like in my finger for like, okay, point on active listening. And I was like, okay, Jake, also hit the point on curiosity too. And maybe there's a third point, and I'll put these in there and I'll just kind of just know those, like active listening, curiosity, active listening, curiosity. I just hold those and I just keep trying to listen. And I just remember, okay, there's 2 points that I want to circle back to. And then when the person's done, what you do is you then reiterate that point back to them. And that's a really good thing to do as an interviewer, is to reiterate what the person said. And so be like, hey, Jake, really loved what you said there on the active listening. That's a really useful, actionable tip I can see. And you kind of elaborate and build on that. And then maybe ask a follow-up question on that as well. And then, you have a conversation on that. And then you can still come back to curiosity. That thing they mentioned 5-10 minutes ago. You can say, oh, also you mentioned the thing on curiosity, definitely see how that could be effective, or a really interesting way to approach it. And it doesn't have to be structured, and you can kind of build on that as well. But that active listening technique, it's a skill that takes a bit of learning, but if you can just do that, just node anytime you're in a conversation, and just keep listening to pull out the good points, that's what kind of works well, because you'll hear whenever an interview goes bad, whenever the guest is saying something really phenomenal and then the host just like curveballs it out of left field, or just like asks some next canned question, and you're like, dude, they just dropped so much brilliance and I want more on what they just said, but like the host is just not even really paying attention to them and they're just worried about what they're going to say next. So yeah, the curiosity and active listening are the 2 things that I always say are like some of the biggest pieces of advice for people trying to improve their interviews. So
I definitely find it's a struggle when hosting to make sure we're moving forward through the progression of the story, because we do pre-interviews. And so I know what they want to say, or what the message is, but then you can end up in interesting places or uninteresting places and cajoling them away. But there's this great YouTube clip making fun of podcast hosts. As soon as someone says something interesting, they immediately interrupt them and switch topics. Like they're just trying to mark. They're just marking time. They're just like, they have beats to hit. It doesn't even matter who's on the other side of the interview. It could be a box of crackers as far as they're concerned. It doesn't make a difference. My goal is to learn and understand the person, try to understand how they think. But I'm always cognizant that people can ramble, like maybe I am right now, but ramble and lose the audience. And so what I'm trying to do in my head as a podcast host is make sure they have a structure to their story so people can actually follow along. That is a difficult task.
yeah,
I don't know if you have any other like techniques to keep things on track.
That's a hard one. And when you have someone that is rambling, that is one of the most challenging things, because you do have to, it's almost like you're aware, hey, they're rambling, I need to move them along, or I need to point them, especially if you do the pre-interviews, you have that knowledge to work with a bit. But yeah, rambling is a challenging one there. And so to try to keep it interesting, yeah, it is very much where you may want to pull out a piece there, or you may want to try to elaborate and move them along to the next step. But that is, it's really easy to interview. Some people are great speakers, but when you get a rambling person, which is sometimes are really phenomenal, intelligent people, but they just are not really trained speakers, is a challenge. Yeah, I don't know if there's an amazing way to handle that, like, as you're saying there, but I think just trying to tee them up to move it along.
I have one more question on this vein, but just one comment on this as well. One thing I realized too is that when guests don't know what the hosts are seeking, they don't want to embarrass themselves, so they'll ramble because they're just spinning around because they have no idea where you're trying to lead them. That's why the pre-interview is really helpful, that you guys agree on the story arc ahead of time so everyone knows where things are heading and where the questions are coming from. I find that really important, as otherwise the guests have no idea why you're asking questions. They'll just keep it abstract. But here's another question. What about different formats? So I've tried, like, we do 1 hour podcasts. I've tried 10-minute ones. I've tried 2-minute ones. Are there other kinds of formats and structures that are high value?
Yeah, in terms of format, there's a lot of different ways to it. I think for this particular strategy and approach, I think you're best off doing the kind of 20 to 35-minute interview kind of approach there. Just because of you want that time to build the relationship. And I've been interviewed on a lot of the, 2-minute rapid fire things or 5-minute rapid fire interviews, and you don't really build a relationship, and it's very systematic to do those. And what I always like is with, if you record a 20 to 35-minute interview or something like that, you can repurpose that into a lot of smaller pieces. You can have a rapid fire section at the end and then repurpose that. And so my thoughts are, if you're going to get someone on an interview, aim for the longer form and then repurpose a ton. And that's kind of the way that I typically think about it, just because A, it's going to give you a better relationship, and B, you can repurpose that and do a ton of it. One of the LTC Hero guys, they actually structured a rapid fire questions at the end of their thing. And now they're turning those into like a Tools of Titan, Tim Ferriss-esque book for the LTC long-term care industry. And so I think that's a really cool way of, they have the long show format, rapid fire, repurpose the rapid fire stuff into other formats. And so I think that's kind of the way to go, but I always err toward long form and then repurpose into short form.
I got a question for you, Jake. On the pre-interview side, I mean, I found, like, not over preparing too much is also kind of a key. Is that, you want to give the I guess the interviewer or the speaker or the guest, the kind of the skeleton of, like, here are the themes that we're going to go through. Here are some of the questions. Like, here's kind of where we're going to start. Here's the middle, and here's kind of the bonus stuff if we have extra time. But here's where we're going, and maybe even asking a few questions, but being like, don't give me the answer. I'm going to ask you a question, but just don't give me the answer. Like, almost not, don't take away the spontaneity of the actual interview as well. Because I find if they go through the motion, then it's like, when you do go to the interview, they feel like they've rehearsed, and it doesn't come out as genuine as well. Like, do you have, like, is there a sweet spot for that pre-interview that you've seen work, or any advice you can give on that piece of it?
Yeah, whenever someone starts going into that, I always like to say, hey, this is awesome. Like, let's save that for the interview, but I definitely want to dive into that point. And that's kind of the way that I'll try to put that there, and then just let the spontaneity happen there. So that's kind of the response that I'll often have. Because it's always really frustrating when you get someone who's so amazing on the pre-interview, and then they show up to the interview and they get all kind of nervous and scripted, and it's no.
Yeah, they feel like they're like, oh, I've already said this, and that makes it that much more awkward for them as they're saying it. They almost like have a deja vu moment, and it takes away that. Then they feel like they're reading, but they're not reading. It's really weird. You wouldn't think it would happen, because people tell stories multiple times, same story multiple times. People do it every day, right? But something to do with being in an interview, when you do it the second time, you feel, I don't know, it's just a different feeling.
Yeah, and it's just something, again, like I said, when you do these types of approaches, you're interviewing lots of people who are just not trained speakers. Like, they have not gone through extensive amounts of this, and that's part of the nature of building these great things. And like, they have amazing insights, and that's what's really cool. If you start a thing for like the business of nursing, like, you're going to be interviewing these people that probably don't get interviewed every day, and pull out really unique, interesting stuff that no one else is talking about. But you're also going to get a lot of people who just don't speak all the time because they're not doing the podcasting tour. And so that's just kind of part of the nature of it. And it's learning to kind of work those dynamics, and, occasionally just dealing with someone who's just not a great speaker in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a risk associated. I mean, obviously, if you can jump on a call with somebody beforehand without the offer to know, okay, like, this is going to be a good conversation. Let's do it. A lot of times you don't have that, especially in this context. I'm sure Joe Rogan does, but like, you know, in this field, like you're not going to get that luxury. You're generally gonna. It's about they're an expert in this theme. We're trying to get information out of them. We know they're not a TV show host, right? So your job as the interviewer is actually quite a lot harder. You know, it's not a interviewer interviewing an actor, it's an interviewer interviewing a nurse, right? So it's like you really do have to have some tactic there to move that conversation forward, so that it's not, so there is some entertainment factor in it and it's easily digestible, right? Because, you know, yeah, why are we here, right?
Yeah, definitely. I love it.
Anyway, we have a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. Jake, is there anything that you wanted to, you felt like you needed to kind of get through that you haven't?
I think I've hit on most of it here. Yeah, this is the main pieces of it all. So again, and if you've, Brad, someone like yourself, you've got a marketing department that can do the content on this or like support on the back end of this, like that's amazing. And where most of the rest of this, you could pretty well run that outreach, do the scheduling, and then just, you know, hand the recordings to your team to turn into content. And, you know, obviously there's kind of, you know, getting the resources for it. But I think what's really cool about this is it becomes something that as a partner manager, you can do all the outreach and the networking and the relationships on your own. And that's, I think, a super powerful part of this approach as well.
Yeah, and I think like the key is to not overthink it, right? Like we're in meetings every day, you're technically interviewing people every day. And for this type of purpose, especially if you're engaging with partners, provide content, like it doesn't have to be this hugely orchestrated thing. It's like, hey, like, let's just start small. Let's have a few interview some people that you already might know in your network. And then, yeah, you can always hire agencies and things to like make it prettier, make it, you know, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, if you can, you know, interview 10 people that you know, or that you know you want to reach out to, it's pretty easy to put together that ask, right? And start reaching out. All right, any other questions, guys? All right, well, Jake is in the Slack channel, so if you do have any follow-up questions, or you want to kind of pick his brain on what you want to launch and what you're thinking about doing, he's more than happy to answer those questions. Jake, thanks very much for agreeing to do this. It's a bit of a different theme from our usual, but I think nonetheless there's an enormous amount of value when kind of thinking about this stuff. So thanks a lot for hosting it.
Thanks for having me on here.
All right, thanks guys. Have
Thanks,
a good
Jake.
rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Bye.